From New York, this is Democracy Now!
I don't call them raids. I say they came in illegally, and we're bringing them out legally. These are people where we have the papers. We've gone through the court system. They'll be starting fairly soon.
As the Trump administration threatens to begin nationwide immigration raids on Sunday, we speak to immigrant rights organizers in New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles to see how their communities are preparing for what some have described to be a form of psychological warfare. Then, 10 years after the U.S.-backed coup in Honduras, we speak to ousted President Manuel Zelaya about the connection between the 2009 coup and today's migrant crisis.
But the causes of migration are the U.S. policies, the IMF policies, the policies of the Southern Command for this region are provoking more and more migrants with each passing day.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump backed down Thursday from his plans to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census after the White House struggled to overcome a Supreme Court ruling saying the administration's justification for its inclusion appears to have been contrived. Instead, Trump said he was issuing an executive order to gather information about people's citizenship status from federal agencies.
I am hereby ordering every department and agency in the federal government to provide the Department of Commerce with all requested records regarding the number of citizens and non-citizens in our country. They must furnish all legally accessible records in their possession immediately.
Ari Berman, senior writer at Mother Jones, tweeted, quote, Trump ordering Commerce Department to still collect citizenship data means GOP can try to draw districts based on citizenship rather than total population in 2021. GOP gerrymandering guru said this would be advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites, unquote. Census officials have estimated 6.5 million people will not respond to the census if the citizenship question had been added, affecting everything from the redrawing of congressional maps to the allocation of federal funding. The fight over the 2020 census came as immigrant communities brace for raids by immigration and customs enforcement targeting at least 2,000 people in their homes and workplaces in Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Denver, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and San Francisco. New Orleans was among the cities targeted for ICE raids this weekend, but the city's mayor said enforcement will be temporarily suspended as Tropical Storm Barry approaches. Ahead of the planned raids, immigrant rights groups have been ramping up efforts to make sure affected communities know their rights. This is Tessie Borden of Chirla, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles.
So immigration raids in our community are something that's very traumatic. And so when they announce them ahead of time, I think part of the intent is to sow chaos in our community. Part of the intent is to try to confuse people, to scare them, to put them on edge.
The ACLU is suing the Trump administration, arguing the raids violate the constitutional right of immigrants to a court hearing before deportation. And mayors across the country have also been standing up to ICE in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Denver, and elsewhere. After Headlines will host a roundtable discussion with immigration activists from different cities preparing for the raids. In New York, one of the cities targeted for this weekend's expected ICE raids, hundreds of immigration activists protested outside the annual conference of Amazon Web Services to protest the tech giant's ties to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. Amazon servers host databases that allow the agencies to track immigrants and carry out deportations. Dozens of protesters made it inside the conference, where they repeatedly disrupted a keynote address by Amazon Chief Technology Officer Werner Vogels.
Amazon, how much longer will you have blood on your hands?
Machine learning, analytics, all of these things.
Cut ties with ICE! Cut ties with ICE! Cut ties with ICE!
After 1 year and 100 days behind bars, prominent Latino journalist Manuel Duran was released Thursday from an ICE jail in Tennessee. Duran was arrested last year while covering a protest against immigrant detention outside a county jail in Memphis. Duran was born in El Salvador. He's a well-known reporter on Spanish-language radio stations who also runs the online site Memphis Noticias. Duran was held behind bars for 15 months on a 12-year-old pending deportation order, but last week a federal appeals court ordered an immigration court to reopen his claim that he's eligible for asylum. Louisiana has declared a state of emergency and ordered some Gulf Coast communities to evacuate as Tropical Storm Barry churns offshore in the Gulf of Mexico ahead of its expected landfall Saturday as a Category 1 hurricane. The storm has flooded parts of Louisiana and threatens to cause an already engorged Mississippi River to overtop levees. The river, which is usually 6 to 8 feet in midsummer, is now at 16 feet due to record flooding this year. New Orleans is only protected to a river level of 20 feet. The National Weather Service expects the Mississippi to approach that level today, marking one of the highest river levels seen in New Orleans in decades. Meanwhile, activists are demanding the immediate evacuation of the more than 65,000 prisoners in the path of the storm throughout Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. In the Persian Gulf, tensions are running high after Britain's government accused Iran's Navy of unsuccessfully trying to block passage of a British commercial ship through the Strait of Hormuz, a charge Iran denies. British authorities say the Iranian warships were stopped only after a UK Navy vessel issued verbal warnings. This comes after police in Gibraltar say they arrested the captain and chief officer of a detained Iranian oil tanker accused of violating European Union sanctions against the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. French lawmakers Thursday approved a digital services tax on Internet giants like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, prompting threats of a new trade war by the Trump administration. Supporters of the 3% tax argue U.S. companies largely avoid paying taxes by setting up headquarters in EU countries with extremely low tax rates on corporate profits. The Trump administration says it's launched an investigation as considering punitive tariffs in retaliation. In New York, the serial child sex abuser, Jeffrey Epstein, asked a federal judge Thursday to release him on bail while he awaits trial on sex trafficking charges. Epstein had been held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan since his arrest Saturday. He offered to put up his $77 million New York City mansion and private jet as collateral. He also offered to pay for security guards in his home and to wear electronic monitoring. If the deal is approved, Epstein would await his trial in the same Manhattan townhouse where he allegedly raped teenage girls from at least 2002 to 2005. Epstein's bid for bail came as at least a dozen new women have come forward to say they were sexually abused by Epstein in the past. In Chicago, federal agents arrested R. Kelly Thursday night again after a U.S. attorney brought a 13-count indictment against the musician, charging him with obstruction of justice, child pornography, and other sex crimes. R. Kelly had been free on a $1 million bond as he faces other charges brought by Illinois prosecutors, including 10 counts of aggravated criminal sexual assault involving 4 women and girls, 3 of whom were under the age of 17 at the time of the alleged crimes. An Air Force general nominated by President Trump to be the next vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is facing allegations of sexual misconduct. The Associated Press reports an unnamed senior military officer accused General John Hyten of making a series of unwanted sexual advances and touching in 2017 while she was one of his aides. The officer says when she rebuffed General Hyten's advances, he tried to derail her military career. Unnamed Air Force officials told the Wall Street Journal an internal investigation found no evidence of sexual misconduct by General Hyten. The Senate has yet to schedule a hearing for his confirmation. Congressional Democrats have approved subpoenas for 12 witnesses to appear before the House Judiciary Committee, including President Trump's son-in-law, senior advisor Jared Kushner. Also on the list are a number of former Trump administration officials, ex-National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, and former White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter. The Judiciary Committee also approved subpoenas for executives of American Media, Inc., publisher of the National Enquirer. The tabloid infamously helped Donald Trump make hush money payments to 2 women who alleged they'd had sexual affairs with him. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy has signed a bill limiting the use of solitary confinement in the state's prisons. The new law prohibits the use of solitary confinement except when there is, quote, reasonable cause to believe that the prisoner or others would be at substantial risk of serious harm as evidenced by recent threats or conduct, unquote. The New Jersey law also carves out special protections for LGBTQ, disabled, elderly, young, or disabled prisoners. It also caps the number of consecutive days prisoners can be held in solitary confinement at 20. In 2011, a United Nations expert on torture called on the U.S. and other nations to ban solitary confinement, except in very exceptional circumstances, saying the practice could amount to torture. The American Federation of Teachers is suing the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, charging the Education Department is illegally and unconstitutionally failing to administer a student loan forgiveness program for millions of public service workers. The program, passed by Congress a decade ago, promises to cancel the student loan debts of qualifying government or nonprofit workers who make loan payments for 10 years. More than 1 million people signed up, but Department of Education figures show just 1% of applications for debt forgiveness have been approved. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has voted to investigate abuses committed by Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte in his campaign against drug dealers, including widespread accounts of extrajudicial killings and other gross human rights violations. By the Philippine government's own estimate, police have killed 6,600 people since Duterte's inauguration 3 years ago. Human rights groups say the true toll could top 27,000. President Duterte has repeatedly boasted that he has personally murdered drug dealers. President Donald Trump has expressed admiration for Duterte, saying he's done an unbelievable job on the drug problem. This week, a funeral was held for the youngest victim of the Philippines drug war, 3-year-old Micah Oplina, who was shot dead by police June 29th at her home near Manila. This is activist Ruby Lynn Latao of the anti-drug war group Rise Up for Life.
And here, another 3-year-old victim. They say it's a collateral damage. We say collateral damage, but we say it's not, because she was killed because of this war on drugs.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Immigrant communities across the country and their allies are preparing for nationwide raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement planned to begin Sunday that will target undocumented members of immigrant families in at least 9 major U.S. cities. Immigration officials told the New York Times the raids will last several days and target at least 2,000 people. They warned the operation could also result in so-called collateral deportations, meaning immigrants who happen to be at the scene of a raid could also be swept up, even if they were not originally targeted. The cities where raids will take place are said to be Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Denver, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and San Francisco. New Orleans had been on the list, but the city announced this weekend that ICE was temporarily postponing the raids due to Hurricane Barry. On Wednesday, acting head of Citizenship and Immigration Services, Ken Cuccinelli, said the raids are absolutely going to happen, though he did not say at the time when they would take place. He added, quote, there's approximately 1 million people in this country with removal orders, but that they weren't the targets of the upcoming ICE raids. Last week, Trump also repeated threats that raids are coming soon.
Well, I don't call them raids. I say they came in illegally, and we're bringing them out legally. These are people where we have the papers. We've gone through the court system. They'll be starting fairly soon, but I don't call them raids. We're removing people that have come in, all of these people over the years that have come in illegally. We are removing them and bringing them back to their country.
President Trump originally announced the raids last month, but later postponed the move, saying he was giving lawmakers a chance to figure out a legislative solution to the, quote, asylum and loophole problems at the southern border. Both the Senate and the House passed a $4.6 border bill, a $4.6 billion border bill, days later, despite a number of progressive lawmakers and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus vehemently opposing the bill. On Thursday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi responded to the news of the raids.
Families belong together. Every person in America has rights. These families are hardworking members of our communities and our country. This brutal action will terrorize children and tear families apart.
As Sunday approaches, immigrant rights groups have been ramping up efforts to make sure affected communities know their rights and are prepared for possible raids. The ACLU is suing the Trump administration on behalf of immigration, legal aid, nonprofit organizations, arguing the raids violate the constitutional right of immigrants to a court hearing before deportation. And mayors across the country have also been standing up to ICE in New York, in San Francisco, in Denver, in Chicago, and elsewhere. This all comes as President Trump has dropped his efforts to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, but on Thursday he issued an executive order to gather information about people's citizenship status from federal agencies. For more, we're hosting a roundtable discussion with activists from different cities preparing for the raids. In Atlanta, Adelina Nichols is the executive director of Georgia Latino Alliance of Human Rights. Shannon Camacho is the Los Angeles County Raids Rapid Response Network coordinator at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, or CHIRLA. She's joining us from L.A. And here in New York, Natalia Artizabal, the co-director of organizing it, Make the Road New York. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Shannon, let's begin with you. Talk about what you understand is going to happen in Los Angeles and how you're preparing for it.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I coordinate our LA Raids Rapid Response Network with CHIRLA, which is the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. And what we've been doing ever since June, when we first expected these operations to begin, is making sure that our community is prepared. And that means doing the Know Your Rights workshops, telling our community members through these workshops not to open the door if ICE comes to their house, to remain silent if ICE stops them on the street, and to make sure they don't sign anything and that they ask to speak to an immigration attorney before they offer any information. So we've been doing these Know Your Rights workshops with our different partners in Los Angeles ever since June, because that's when we first thought that these operations would begin. So honestly, every single week since then, we've been in preparation mode. We've been strategizing with different volunteer attorneys that are part of our LA Raids Rapid Response Network to make sure that we have a strategy if people start being arrested, and then there needs to be intakes at the local ICE processing center. And so regardless of what happens, whether the operations start tomorrow or whether they start on Sunday, we have been prepared.
Explain what you mean when you say don't open the door. Would then ICE knock the door down?
Right. So here's the thing. ICE only has permission to enter an individual's home if they have a judicial warrant that is signed by a judge. And not only that, but that judicial warrant has to have all of the information, including the person's name, the person's address, the time of the incident. All of that has to be accurate. So I can say, and our attorneys know this very well, that it is very rare that ICE is actually able to obtain a judicial arrest warrant. Most of the time, they do not have that, meaning they do not have permission to enter people's homes. So given that, we tell our community members that if ICE knocks on the door, no matter how aggressively, no matter what they say to people, and we do know that this is a very deceptive agency that pretends to be police, that doesn't answer questions, we tell our community members that no matter what ICE does, don't open the door, because the only way that they could get in is with that judicial arrest warrant. And if they give you any sort of administrative warrant or any other kind of document, you have to review it to make sure that it's a judicial warrant signed by a judge. So that's what we tell our community members here in Los Angeles. And
what if they don't speak English? How do they read this warrant? And how do they know what to look for, what is legitimate and what isn't?
Exactly. That is a very good point. It is a very complicated process, which only makes it more important that we have these Know Your Rights workshops. So our Know Your Rights workshops, they're in Spanish. They're for our community members here in Los Angeles, our immigrant and undocumented members. And what we do is we have copies of a judicial arrest warrants and use that next to an administrative warrant that ICE usually uses when they goes to people's houses, and we compare the two. We pass those out to people so that they familiarize themselves with those documents, so that in the case that ICE does slip it under the door, they're able to recognize it. But I think that that's a very good point, that this is an agency that is trying to deceive people, and these people may not know what is going on. For the people that don't attend Know Your Rights workshops, they may not know what a judicial warrant is and whether ICE has permission to enter their home. And so that only makes it more important that we do the outreach to make sure as many people are aware of their rights as possible.
Natalia Aristizabal of Make the Road, how are you preparing here in New York, and what is the city doing?
Good morning, first of all, and thank you for having me. So very similar to what was being shared from Sherla, we are doing Know Your Rights. But additionally, what we're doing is also letting people know who is possibly at risk right now. The administration leaked, or like the press found out information specifically about who they're going to be looking for. So we're telling community members those rights, but also saying if you had a previous order of deportation, if you had any contact before with ICE, you are likely a person that they're going to come looking for you. They often, for different reasons, have people's home addresses, and that's how they're going to go and find someone. So we tell people, you have to go and get a legal screening. You have to go try to get and see if you have any relief. And then definitely to do family preparations. If you have a little kid, you need to figure out who in your family is going to be able to take care of that little kid. You need to be able to put together your paperwork and your home passport and put it in a secure place and make sure that someone in your home knows all this information. And also in a city like New York, know that there is legal representation free and available.
I mean, this is a critical point. You have people who might be taken, whose children, U.S. citizens, are in the house.
Yes, I mean, this is a problem with what is happening currently, that there is no humanity towards the actions that ICE and the administration are taking. They have no problem kidnapping people before they go to work or before they come back home, and they do not think about the impact that it has on a family, on the health or economic well-being of that family.
And what about the policy of New York City being a sanctuary city? Does that help in any way? Can people, oddly enough, to say this, but can people turn to the police? Mayor Bill de Blasio says the police will not cooperate with ICE.
So we have policies in place that say that no city employee, including NYPD, is not supposed to collaborate with ICE. Unfortunately, we've had community members come to us saying, I heard when ICE was knocking at a neighbor's door, and we called the police, and the police came and told all of us that we had to collaborate with ICE. Otherwise, we were obstructing the law. So I think it depends. And unfortunately, even though if you have blanket policies, the individuals may want to choose different actions because they either believe in the deportation system or in the presidency, or maybe they just don't know better.
And Adelina Nichols in Atlanta of the Georgia Latina Alliance of Human Rights, how are you preparing there, and what is the city doing about this?
First of all, thank you for having me. Amy, we have been preparing since 2016, and I don't know if you remember that we had here like a nationwide, another operation that was to target Central American families around the United States. Here in the state of Georgia, more than 130 families were targeted with their children. At that time, our concern is that why our community members continue opening the door to ICE. So we engaged in a basis door-to-door campaign called ICE Free Zone, Zona Libre de ICE, where we go talking to people, to neighborhoods, to the trailer parks, to the churches, to the grocery stores, canvassing. Many volunteers have helped us with this purpose and allowing us to talk directly to our community members. At this point, we believe that we have visited more than, or talked to people, more than 25,000 communities around the metro area and statewide, but as well trying to send and using the social media for people to connect what is happening inside their own communities. We are trying to put together forces as well to pushing back these detainer policies that could allow the localities not to collaborate with ICE.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion as we talk about how cities and immigrant rights activists and families are preparing for immigration raids that President Trump has announced for 10 cities. They're holding back on New Orleans because another kind of hurricane is about to hit, the natural hurricane, Barry. So they're saying that the ICE raids won't take place there in the midst of the storm. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
Asómate a la ventana. Te traje una serenata. Aunque estés encarcelado, mira, te canta quien te ama. Por ti me juego la vida. Por liberarte me muero en la raya. Ay, qué leyes tan injustas que buscan separarnos.
Serenaded to an undocumented person by Los Jornaleros del Norte. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue our roundtable discussion ahead of this weekend's announced raids in 9 major U.S. cities, immigration raids to round up thousands of people, and, as the administration says, anyone who's in the way. In Atlanta, Adelina Nichols is the executive director of Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. Shannon Camacho is joining us from Los Angeles with the Los Angeles County Raids Rapid Response Network, coordinator of the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, or CHRLA. And here in New York, Natalia Aristizabal, co-director of organizing at Make the Road New York. Shannon Camacho, the city, how is it preparing? And let me ask you this. I mean, in Hong Kong, we've seen marches of 1 million. In this country, around the issue of immigrant rights, we've seen millions march. Would that make a difference, do you think?
We absolutely believe that that will make a difference, yes. Even in June, when we believed that the operations were going to start, what our LA Raids Rapid Response Network did is us and our partners, we went to the local ICE processing center in downtown Los Angeles, and we had a rally in front of that center because we wanted to make a message and show ICE and the community of Los Angeles and the rest of the United States that LA is going to stand by our undocumented family members and our undocumented brothers and sisters. And so we believe that that is very important because we have to tie this into the larger issue. Tomorrow, we are going to have an action on July 12th. Today, we're going to have an action tonight at the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles, which is right next to the ICE Processing Center. And we're going to do this to show that the Department of Homeland Security is an agency that doesn't have any regard for human life, and that ICE is a part of this agency, so that when Congress is approving $4.6 billion, no questions asked, for the Department of Homeland Security, what they're doing is giving money for these arrests. What they're doing is giving money for detention centers where people are dying at the southern border. And we need to connect those issues together and show how important it is as a community that we demand that Congress not continue to fund the Department of Homeland Security. And so for that, we need to have rallies and marches and public actions that show that we're ready to act and that the community is present. So we have been planning that since June, and tonight we are going to have that action in downtown Los Angeles.
Can people intervene, Shannon, if they see a raid taking place? And what about these collateral arrests they're talking about? Anyone in the way?
Mm-hmm. Right. That's a very important point as well. And it's something that puts a lot of fear in the community, because even though Trump is saying, I'm going to target people, very specific people, Central American families and people with final deportation orders, it's not just that. ICE has the discretion to make collateral arrests. So there may be people just in the wrong place at the wrong time that do get swept up into the deportation machine. And that's something that we teach folks through our Know Your Rights workshops. And I think in terms of how folks can respond, We always say that if you are a citizen, if you are an ally, use that privilege. Be able to, when you see something going on in the street or you notice that your neighbors are experiencing some kind of ICE arrest, go out and document what is happening. Film ICE and try to make the situation calmer for the family, because it is such an intense and terrifying situation to have ICE come to your door early in the morning and arrest you. And so we really encourage the community to protect each other and to make sure that people don't feel alone in that scary moment.
Immigration,
so we really encourage it.
Immigration, legal aid, nonprofit groups represented by the ACLU are suing the Trump administration in anticipation of the raids, arguing they violate the constitutional right of immigrants to a court hearing before deportation. ACLU of Southern California is saying in a statement the Trump administration's plan to arrest and deport thousands of Central American families and children without giving them a fair day in court is both illegal and immoral. More than 100 years ago, the Supreme Court decided immigrants could not be deported without due process. These vulnerable refugees deserve that basic protection. Natalia, here in New York, on this issue, you have child jails, adult jails, immigration jails packed to the gills, 10 times what they were a few years ago. Where are they putting all these people who they're arresting?
I mean, they're putting them in the detention centers, both funded by government money, like what just passed in Congress, or in private detention centers. Their administration is also getting ready to get places like hotels and other holdings, also local jails when they have contracts with ICE. And these are the places where they're trying to figure out how to put people to deport them. And I think you said something really important, which is that the administration is not allowing due process. And also a lot of the people who are being persecuted and looked for are people who could have shown up to court, but maybe they didn't get the notice right away. They didn't get a lawyer. Sometimes the courts will move someone's court day to a day without telling them. And because of that, they get an order of removal. Like, it's not the case that they're only looking for people who have criminal cases. It's not the case that everybody who they're looking for should be deported. And it's actually, if people had the right to a lawyer and a due process, most of the time they're able to stay here and to prove that, that everything with their case is fine.
Adelina Nichols, what is the position of the Atlanta mayor right now? Do you feel you have the city's support in not cooperating with ICE?
Yes, she is the one that have made that difference here in the state of Georgia. The city of Atlanta had to stand up with immigrant communities, closing ACDC, this detention center where ICE used to send many immigrants that were detained around in Georgia. And the mayor stand up and support all our efforts against this criminalization, as well as collaboration with ICE.
Well, we want to thank you all for being with us. Of course, we're going to continue to cover this through the weekend and next week. Adelina Nichols joining us from Atlanta, the Georgia Latino Alliance of Human Rights. Shannon Camacho, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, speaking to us from Los Angeles. And Natalia Aristizabal here in New York of Make the Road New York. When we come back, 10 years after the U.S.-backed coup in Honduras, we speak to the ousted president, Manuel Zelaya, about the connection between the 2009 coup and today's migrant crisis. Stay with us. Humano, Human, by Lido Pimiento. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show in Honduras to look at some of the root causes of the migration crisis and how it links to U.S. foreign policy. Honduras recently marked the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-backed coup that ousted the democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya. The coup was orchestrated by the Honduran military, business, and political elite with the support of the Obama administration. Since then, extreme poverty and violence has skyrocketed in Honduras. Tens of thousands of Hondurans have been murdered, including more than 300 LGBTQ people, about 60 journalists, hundreds of peasant rights and environmental activists. Tens of thousands of refugees have also fled Honduras, most with the hope of receiving political asylum in the United States. Meanwhile, mass protests are continuing to take place in Honduras against the right-wing government of Juan Orlando Hernandez and his plans to privatize health care, pensions, and education. Protesters have been met with violent repression from the Honduran military and police. Last week, we spoke with ousted Honduran President Manuel Zelaya. We reached him in Tegucigalpa. I spoke with him along with Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez. I asked President Zelaya about the 10th anniversary of the coup and the link between drug traffickers and government corruption.
Well, look, the coup d'etat inexorably marks a new form of U.S. meddling in our society.
El señor John Dimitri Negroponte, subsecretario de Estado.
10 years ago, John Negroponte, Undersecretary of State, and President George W. Bush warned me and threatened me when I was president of Honduras, saying that if I had relations with Hugo Chavez, then I would have problems with the United States. 6 months after that warning, I was removed from power and removed from this country. The problem for the United States is that the friends of those who they consider their adversaries are not their friends. They've decided they're enemies of the United States, quite simply because I was seeking better relations with the South, bringing in oil from Venezuela and getting financing for hydroelectric projects with President Lula Silva, who they are now holding prisoner in Brazil. So the policies of the United States towards this region changed. And they made a mistake. And I'll talk to you about the gangs, the maras, in just a moment, your question. But if you think about the elite in the U.S. government, well, their view for this region is mistaken. They want to go back to the 1980s, which was marked by the Cold War, stigmatizing the opposition. They've created shock forces, a psychological war, dirty war. Well, if they think that they're going to be able to stop migration in this way, well, it's only going to worsen. The gangs are a link in the drug trafficking business, and they come about because there's no jobs, there's an excess of poverty. Poverty is misery in Honduras. Youth find no solution. So, organizations such as well, then the drug trafficking organizations come on the scene, and instead of creating more jobs, the government brings more repression. Plus, these are components of the dictatorship the United States is supporting. They've looted the country. Since the coup d'etat in these 10 years, each year, the United States, through the International Monetary Fund, has authorized $24 billion of additional debt each year. So now we have approximately $14 billion debt. When they removed me 10 years ago, we only owed $3 billion. Today it's $14 billion. So to uphold the dictatorship, first they militarize the country, then they drive the country into debt, and they take out huge credits, which they call sovereign bonds, at huge interest rates. And of every 100 lempiras, 40 now go to the banks. Plus, they loot the state institutions. The levels of corruption are exorbitant. They're abusive in every sense of the word. They've looted institutions such as Social Security, which is where the retirement funds for the elderly are, and where the monies are to cover the illnesses that the mothers suffer. They have looted these institutions in order to finance an unpopular, anti-democratic, and dictatorial regime. The United States doesn't talk about Honduras because it's shameful. They're ashamed to talk about what they're supporting in Honduras. And the only thing to do about it is to denounce it, because there are murders, there are death squads. They've exported what's called Plan Colombia to Honduras, the false positives, where many opposition leaders, such as Berta Cáceres, to mention one, or Murillo at the time of the coup, or another person who is asphyxiated, a 24-year-old who is asphyxiated by the gases. All of these, there's no way to describe these crimes over the last 10 years other than by calling them crimes against humanity. And this country should be brought before the International Criminal Court, because what U.S. policy is doing is supporting genocide in Honduras and in Central America.
President Zelaya, I would like to ask you about another country in the region, about the role of Mexico, because many expected that when Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the presidency in Mexico, that Mexico would develop a more humane policy toward the refugees coming across its borders. What's your assessment of the first year or the first several months of AMLO's presidency in relationship to your country and your situation?
Mire, Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
Well, look, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I consider him to be a profoundly human man with values that are in line with great moral principles for the region and for Mexico and for Central America.
Muy clara frente a Estados Unidos.
He has had a very clear position vis-a-vis the United States. I believe that Mr. Trump's pressures against Mexico are serious when they threaten to impose tariffs on Mexican merchandise. Well, that produces more migrants, more migration, and more poverty in our region. So the policies of Mr. Andrés Manuel López Obrador are practically being punished by the United States.
Los problemas de la migración van a buscar alguna salida en cuanto.
In focusing on migration, they're going to look for some solution to the system that is provoking the migrants. Because everyone talks about migration, but the causes of migration are the U.S. policies, the IMF policies, the policies of the Southern Command for this region are provoking more and more migrants with each passing day. So militarizing Central America, militarizing Honduras means that escape valve that the Honduran people have had, which is to be able to get work in the United States. And the Honduran people haven't even looked for jobs in the United States. It is the U.S. businesses. U.S. businesses, for example, have large crops and cannot pay a U.S. person to work in the countryside. They give the travel expenses to the family members of those who are their employees. And that is why there's massive migration to work in the United States. They might work 6 months or a year and then go back and then return. Migration is a human process seeking to find solutions. When they militarize the border, what they're going to provoke here will be greater convulsions, greater explosions, and the Honduran people, you've seen this in media reports, the Honduran people are in the streets and they're protesting. And they're not protesting because we, the opposition, tell them to protest. Nobody goes out to protest because some politician tells them to do so. Maybe there'd be a group of 100 people in that context, but here it's thousands of people in different parts of the country engaged in massive protests, peaceful protests. They do not use weapons. At most,
lo que llamamos movilizaciones.
The protesters might mobilize in the streets, making traffic difficult, bringing transportation to a halt.
De migrantes, esas manifestaciones de que ha subido la pobreza.
Expressions of migration shows that poverty has worsened, the debt has gone up, and people are in the streets protesting because the cost of electricity, the cost of transportation, the cost of fuel.
En Honduras ya han privatizado casi todo. Entonces, eso le debería dar una evidencia.
Almost everything has been privatized in Honduras. So that should be evidence that this, which is a model for neoliberal capitalism, everything is turned into a business for a small group, and for the rest, there's no solution. It's a failure of Mr. Donald Trump in Central America. And then drug trafficking increases. No one wants to say so, but drug trafficking increased after the coup d'etat because the drug traffickers, when they see a country that they can control through an authoritarian system, well, they immediately get involved. Here, they found the military and the police. So, democracy is the way forward for Honduras and Central America. The United States should learn to live with democracy and not be creating repressive policies against us. We have the same right that they do to be able to make a living and live in freedom.
You have the current president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, investigated by the U.S. government for drug trafficking, and his brother, Tony Hernandez, actually arrested for cocaine trafficking. He was arrested in Miami. He's currently awaiting trial in this country. What does this mean for the people of Honduras? I mean, this is under the Trump administration that supports the current president, Hernandez.
Solo tiene una lectura.
Well, there's only one way to read this. The United States is protecting its dictator here.
Equivocadamente cree que eso le beneficia al gobierno de Donald Trump.
And mistakenly, they think that benefits the government of Donald Trump. Donald Trump might win re-election in the United States.
Mundo que toma medidas en nuestro país en beneficio de la democracia de Honduras.
If the world sees that he's taking measures in favor of democracy in Honduras rather than in favor of the dictatorship as he is doing now. Drug trafficking is a measure of that. Drug trafficking is managed by the DEA. The DEA knows of each shipment that comes out of Venezuela and Colombia. The DEA knows about it. And some pass through without any problem, and others are stopped. So there is not a fight against drug trafficking. There is a fight against cartels. There are some cartels that are fought, and others, they let them go.
Ellos conocen aquí las implicaciones del narcotráfico. Sin embargo,
they know the implications of drug trafficking here. Nonetheless, justice is selective. They take action against some and protect the others. I think the president is protected by the United States.
10 years ago, before the coup against you, throughout Latin America, there were progressive governments trying to change the social conditions of their people. And we've seen this enormous change in Brazil and in your country, in the attacks in Argentina, in the attacks on the government in Venezuela. What is your sense of what is happening in Latin America today in terms of the movements of peoples for greater social equality?
Elio Ebran lo acaba de decir en unas declaraciones que dio en el Senado norteamericano.
Well, there were some statements he recently made by a U.S. senator that triumph in socialism was seen that it could set a bad example for the United States, because it could even impact domestic politics in the United States. They could not allow socialism, modern socialism, I would say, because this is a socialism that is different than the socialism one found in Europe during the Cold War. This is a socialism that accepts capital, not capitalism, but capital. It accepts private enterprise, not control by capitalism of the state, because we understand the concept of popular sovereignty, where sovereignty resides in the people. Power does not reside in a military or economic elite as under the neoliberal model. So, of course, for the United States, which has internal opposition, because internally in the United States there's begun to be talk of democratic socialism. I've heard Democratic Party candidates talking about democratic socialism. That is why the policy of the United States towards our region has changed. And in Brazil, they went after Dilma Rousseff with a technical coup d'etat.
Socialistas con el pueblo hondureño y con la región.
Because of socialist agreements with the people of Honduras and others in the region. And the right won the elections because Lula was in prison. They would not have done so if Lula were free. And now the United States not only trains military, but also judges.
La utilizan como un instrumento político.
Because they're using the justice system as a tool for political purposes.
President Zelaya, what is your assessment of President Trump and what he's doing along the border?
Yo no sé si eso le trae a él beneficios electorales.
I don't know if that brings him any electoral benefit, but I consider it to be an absurd action in a globalized world in which for the last 3 decades we've been talking about free trade, talking about competition and competitiveness as part and parcel of the development of capitalism. And now he has come up to putting a halt to globalization. So Trump is like a negation of the historic process. He is a setback in almost every sense. But in a conservative society such as the United States, that can bring him electoral benefits. But in the eyes of the world, he is behaving like a white supremacist, very with no human sensitivity as one would require in the 21st century. Because migration is a right, not a crime. And the migration of the poor northward is bad, but if migration of the investors southward is good. The investors come to take over the natural resources, to take over like an oligopoly, and they further impoverish our countries, and that impoverishment produces migration and the increase in drug trafficking and so on and so forth. So I see that Mr. Donald Trump's policies with the Republican Party represent a setback when it comes to having good neighbor relations with Latin America.
Of all aid to the Northern Triangle countries, to El Salvador, to Guatemala, and to your country, Honduras. This is very interesting considering he supports Juan Orlando Hernandez, the president. Now he's backed off cutting that aid, but threatens to do so if the immigrant flow continues. Do you think President Hernandez would fall without that U.S. aid?
Nosotros no necesitamos la ayuda de Estados Unidos.
We don't need the help of the United States. The United States gives very little assistance. What the United States wants is to exercise economic control over the structures of the macroeconomy worldwide. For example, the World Bank gives Honduras
$50 millones al año, 150.
some $150 million a year, $150 million. The Inter-American Development Bank, a similar sum. So all told, we might get about $240 million, and that is controlled by the United States. And it also has a specific weight in our region. The IMF authorizes a letter that is signed every year so that Honduras can go into debt at very high interest rates because it is a government that is allied with the United States.
Lo que provoca en nuestra región, yo creo que
what that provokes in our region is clear, I think.
Provoca en nuestra región.
I think it's evident what it causes in our region.
Que ellos hablan de que van a reducir la ayuda.
I believe that relationship where they say they're going to cut the assistance has almost no effect. Let me put it in clearer terms. Honduran migrants
$4,000 millones al año. Se lo voy a repetir.
Send to Honduras about $4 billion a year. Let me repeat this, Amy, $4 billion a year. And the United States, together with the World Bank and the IDB, sends $200 million. So Honduras should be concerned, and the current president has no dignity.
A los gringos y decirle las cosas en igualdad de condiciones.
We should be able to speak to the Americans on equal conditions with reciprocity and dignity. But he doesn't protest because the immigration treaty we had with the United States was canceled. We had an immigration treaty. It was renewed every year. Indeed, I had good relations with the United States.
Las petroleras norteamericanas y europeas no aceptan la competencia.
The U.S. and European oil companies don't accept competition, but they respected me.
Me renovaron el TPS. Todos los años.
And every year, they renewed TPS. Every year they renewed the Millennium Account, but this year they have not renewed a single penny of the Millennium Account.
De amenazas a esa ayuda.
But of course, the policies threatening
eso no desequilibra el país. La ayuda
that aid
es más.
Well, the U.S. aid,
control hegemónico del capitalismo a través de la
from the standpoint of hegemonic control of capitalism through the transnational corporations, through businesses,
sobre la seguridad del Fondo Monetario,
through the control of the Southern Command over security and the IMF over the economy, and the OAS. The OAS.
Una fuerza interna en materia de justicia a través de la mafia.
Has supported or made an internal effort on the justice system through the MACCIH. So if the justice system is controlled by the OAS and the U.S. and Monetary Fund and IDB control the economy and security is controlled by the Southern Command, then
llama que es un bono que le da a los partidarios para que le den el voto. Es lo único que maneja. Todo lo demás está fundamentado.
Well, then what does Honduras run? It's all based on U.S. policy and on the interference and meddling of the United States in Honduras.
Simplemente de ponernos de acuerdo.
We should simply reach agreement because the United States is a strong neighbor.
Más grande del mundo.
It's the biggest military and technological power in the world.
Tampoco se trata de ser vasallo o de doblar.
It's not that we're going to be the same as the United States, but we should not be a vassal of the United States.
Se trata de que somos un pequeño país, pero con la misma dignidad que
we are a small country, but with the same dignity as the Europeans and the U.S. have.
Former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya. He was ousted in a U.S.-backed coup in 2009. To see the interview in Spanish, visit democracynow.org/es. To see all our coverage of Honduras, go to democracynow.org. Special thanks to Maria Taracena. And happy Democracy Now! 15th anniversary to our transcript editor, Neil Shibata. Thank you, Neil, for your incredible work and wisdom. Joining Mike Burke, Mike DeFilippo, Isis Phillips, and John Randolph in the 15ers Club. We kneel before you, Neil.